Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a truly fascinating historical narrative found right in the book of 1 Samuel, specifically chapters 8 through 10, 13, and 15 through 16. We're looking at ancient Israel's pretty dramatic transition from being guided by judges to demanding their very first monarchs. It's a story packed with the heavy pressures of social conformity, the sudden rise and tragic fall of leaders, and this profound shift in how we measure true worth. We're going to trace the journey of a people who just desperately wanted to fit in with the world around them. And in the process, we'll uncover a timeless lesson about the stark difference between how mortals judge one another and how the divine perspective operates. Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to think about this question for a second. Have you ever misjudged someone based purely on their outward appearance? Maybe you assumed someone was highly capable just because they, looked the part. Or conversely, perhaps you completely underestimated someone because they didn't fit a conventional mold. It's a deeply relatable human tendency to just look at the surface. Well, as we'll see in the source material today, this exact tendency completely altered the destiny of an entire ancient nation. The Israelites were about to make some monumental decisions based on what looked good on the outside, setting the stage for a powerful lesson in looking deeper. Here is the roadmap for our explainer today. We're following a chronological narrative. First, a king like other nations. Second, Saul, the outward choice. Third, to obey is better. Fourth, looking on the heart. And finally, seeing as God sees. Part 1. A king like other nations. Israel's demand for conformity. Our story kicks off with a massive cultural shift in 1 Samuel chapter 8. For years, Israel had been guided by judges, but they approached the prophet Samuel with a pretty bold demand. They wanted a king so they could be like all the nations. It was a classic ancient case of peer pressure. And this brilliantly illustrates the immense tension at play here. On one hand, they wanted conformity. They wanted a visible, earthly king to fight their battles and give them worldly status. But in stark contrast, God warned them, through Samuel, about the severe consequences of this choice. It's this powerful clash between the immediate, flashy appeal of fitting in and the heavy, hidden costs of that conformity. So Samuel lays out these warnings with incredible specificity. He tells the Israelites that an earthly king will draft their sons to run before his chariots and make instruments of war. He's going to take their daughters to be cooks and bakers. He'll literally seize their absolute best fields, vineyards, and olive yards to give to his own servants. And he'll tax 1/10 of their sheep. Samuel then concludes with a chilling warning. When you cry out because of this king you've chosen, the Lord will not hear you in that day. But despite this heavy price of peer pressure, the people refused to listen. They simply said, "Nay, but we will have a king over us."
Part 2. Saul, the outward choice, an impressive appearance.
Because God honors human agency, he consents to their demand and actually instructs Samuel to anoint a king. The man chosen in chapters 9 and 10 is a Benjamite named Saul, and this is a guy who, in every physical sense, looked the part. But what is deeply fascinating about Saul is his starting point. When the time actually comes for Samuel to present him to the people as their new monarch, Saul is nowhere to be found. The people inquire of the Lord, and the answer comes back, "Behold, he hath hid himself among the stuff." He was literally hiding in the baggage. The source material highlights that Saul was initially little in his own sight. He was self-conscious about his family heritage and incredibly nervous about this massive responsibility. It's just a very human, very relatable moment of insecurity right before stepping onto the grand stage. But once they bring Saul out and he actually stands among the people, his physical presence is absolutely undeniable. He is the undisputed #1 choice based purely on optics. The scriptures explicitly note that from his shoulders upward he was taller than any of the people. When the Israelites looked at Saul, they didn't see his internal insecurities, right? They saw this towering, handsome figure who could stand toe-to-toe with the kings of the rival nations. He was the ultimate outward choice, and the people excitedly shouted, "God save the king!" Part 3. To obey is better. The fall of King Saul. Let's move to chapters 13 and 15 and see how this builds, because the narrative takes a sharp turn here. The impressive outward appearance of King Saul begins to mask a deep internal flaw, a lack of exact obedience. When faced with the pressures of leadership, the looming threat of enemies, and the opinions of his own soldiers, Saul repeatedly chooses his own wisdom over the specific instructions delivered to him by the prophet Samuel. The source material refers to a modern concept that perfectly describes Saul's behavior, the cafeteria approach to obedience. Basically, this is the practice of picking and choosing which commandments to keep while ignoring the ones you find inconvenient. It's exactly like picking items in a cafeteria line. In chapter 15, God commands Saul to utterly destroy the Amalekites and all their livestock. Saul goes to battle and is victorious, but he takes that cafeteria approach. He destroys what is vile and refuse, sure, but he spares the Amalekite king, Agag, and keeps the absolute best of the sheep, oxen, and fatlings for himself and his people. He followed some instructions, but felt completely justified in just ignoring the rest. When Samuel confronts Saul about the bleating of sheep he hears in the background, we see a fascinating psychological breakdown of a leader frantically trying to cover his tracks. Step 1. Saul greets Samuel and boldly lies, claiming, "I have performed the commandment of the Lord." Step 2. When pressed, he justifies it, saying they kept the best animals to sacrifice to God. Sounds noble, but it's an excuse. Step 3. He completely shifts the blame, claiming the people spared the best sheep. And finally, in step 4, the truth comes out. Saul breaks down and admits, "I feared the people and obeyed their voice." His desire for the approval of men completely outweighed his devotion to the Lord. So the crucial point is captured right here in Samuel's devastating response to Saul. Samuel asks if the Lord delights in performative rituals as much as simple, direct obedience. And then he delivers one of the most famous lines in the text. "Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams." Samuel teaches that true, inward obedience and submission to God's will is infinitely more valuable than outward displays of piety or justified rebellion. Because Saul rejected the word of the Lord rejected him from being king.
Part 4. Looking on the heart. The search for a new king.
Because Saul rejected the word of the Lord, this rejection ushers in the events of 1 Samuel chapter 16. God tells Samuel to travel to Bethlehem to a man named Jesse, for God has provided a new king among his sons. Samuel is terrified, but he obeys. When Samuel arrives, Jesse's sons pass before him in a very surprising sequence. Step 1, Jesse presents his oldest son, Eliab. Samuel looks at him and thinks, well, surely this is the Lord's anointed. Eliab likely had the same tall, striking, royal look that Saul had, but God rejects him. Step 2, Abinadab and Shammah pass by, rejected. Step 3, a total of 7 older, strong, impressive sons pass before the prophet, and none of them are chosen. Finally, step 4, Samuel asks if there are any other children. Jesse admits there is the youngest, out keeping the sheep. They fetch David, a youth with a ruddy and beautiful countenance, and the Lord tells Samuel, "Arise, anoint him, for this is he." This brings us to the central thesis of our entire explainer. When Samuel was looking at Eliab ready to anoint him based purely on his impressive physical stature, the Lord stopped him with these words, "Look not on his countenance or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth. For man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart." God wasn't going to make the same mistake the Israelites made with Saul. He was looking entirely past the superficial packaging to see the true substance, the internal devotion, and the spiritual capacity of the young shepherd boy, David. Part 5. Seeing as God sees. Applying the lesson today. Now, what's really interesting here is how we take this historical narrative, this huge shift from King Saul to King David, and bring it into our modern application. The source material challenges us to reflect on this transition. We literally have to learn how to transition our own vision because we face 2 competing perspectives every single day. The mortal tendency is to look at outward appearance, just like the Israelites did with Saul's height. We look at social status, superficial labels, and visible flaws or insecurities, just like Jesse did when he left his youngest son out in the fields. But the divine reality is entirely different. God looks at the heart. He sees inward desires, a willingness to obey, and limitless divine potential. Where we might see a mere shepherd boy, God sees the greatest future king of Israel. From all of this, we have some absolutely incredible, actionable takeaways. First, we must actively try to see past superficial labels and outward appearances in our daily lives. Second, we're challenged to recognize that limitless divine potential exists in everyone, even those the world completely overlooks. Third, we need to learn from Saul's tragic fall and avoid the cafeteria approach to obedience. We just can't let the fear of other people's opinions cause us to compromise our principles. And finally, we must always prioritize deep inward devotion over outward worldly conformity. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. If you could somehow put on those divine lenses right now, if you could truly see yourself and the people around you exactly as God sees them, looking directly on the heart rather than the outward appearance, how would your relationships change today? How would it change the way you judge strangers, family members, or even your own potential? The story of 1 Samuel reminds us that the world is absolutely obsessed with the surface. But true greatness, true leadership, and true worth are always forged in the heart. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Keep looking deeper.